In last week's video, I posed a question to you all. Is JK Rowling's new book just a piece of self-insert fan fiction? And in that video, we compared JK Rowling to Ebony Darkness Dementia Raven Way, the self-insert main character of the famous 2006 emo girl fanfiction fantasy My Immortal, which is set in the universe of Harry Potter, the very universe that JK Rowling herself created. Well, today, after reading this monster of a book, after falling asleep twice while reading this chonky boy of a thick-ass tome, I am back with an answer for you all.
42.
Yeah, JK's main character does get a little too close to Mary Sue territory for comfort.
Now who's the damsel in distress?
Me?
Straight up.
But y'all, it's worse than that. Not only is this book written by an okay boomer type trying to capture the nostalgia of edgy internet culture from a misplaced time period she never truly experienced, not only is this book a cash grab from an author who's recently used her wealth and fame to promote anti-LGBTQ rhetoric online, not only is it yet another sign that JK herself peaked back during the days of My Immortal, but guys, the worst part about this book is it's boring. As y'all know, I like to take one for the team.
Oh, God.
I'm a team player, and that's why instead of making you all read through 1,100, 1,100 pages of boring prose and bad formatting, I decided to do it for you. So let's dive into today's video. I read JK Rowling's new book, so you don't have to.
Get you some nuts.
There was lots of memes.
Makes me wonder if I should pick up lesbianism.
Chicago.
You guys asked for it.
What's up, my fellow small business supporters? I'm Savvy, and welcome back to Savvy Writes Books, the channel where we talk about books and business, where today I've got another book review for you guys, one that has been highly requested after last week's video, and I want to give a quick thank you to everyone who sent me a PDF copy of this book. A bunch of people came through for me with the PDF copies that you guys had. Yes, the formatting is just as bad as all the Goodreads and Amazon reviews want us to believe, but I read this thing, okay, you guys? If you're new here, please don't forget to subscribe, because every Friday morning at 11 a.m. Central, and often other times throughout the week, I put up new videos all about books and business, including book reviews, reviews of books about business, reviews of the book publishing industry itself, and discussions about being a small business owner and all of that. So if that's something that you're interested in, don't forget to ring the notification bell so that you won't miss new videos when they go up on this channel either. And while you're at it, don't forget to subscribe to my second channel, Your Morning Guru, linked in the description below, which is my live streaming channel where every single weekday morning at 7 a.m. Central, my friend and I do a live stream morning show to get you up in the morning where we cover a lot of similar types of topics. Today's video is not sponsored, so I'll just plug myself real quick, but like not in a sexual way.
Nice. Nice.
Instead, I wanted to let you guys know that right now, on that second channel, Your Morning Guru, we are running a charity fundraiser to raise money for educational initiatives in New Orleans. So at the end of October, we're going to be running a virtual 5K, and if you go to savvywritesbooks.com, which is linked in the description below, you can get your virtual 5K t-shirt. For each t-shirt sold, we are donating $15 to the charity, so that's a great way to help us raise money and to participate in this fun event we're going to do together. And additionally, in the interest of being an artsy emo girl just like Ebony from My Immortal, I have recently decided to start my own boss babe side hustle, where I'm now taking commissions to make custom American Girl doll modifications. I'll put some of my examples from recent dolls that I've created up on the screen. So once again, visit savvywritesbooks.com, linked in the description below if you'd like more information on that. Now, let's talk about our girl, JK Rowling, or as I like to call her, Dave K. Rowling, or Dave Karen Rowling, because if you've seen my Deep Dave series, you know how Daves are. Dave Hollis, Dave Ramsey, Dave Portnoy. The Daves just start coming and they don't stop coming all over all of your moms, and that's why JK Rowling is an honorary Dave, but not a real Dave because she wasn't assigned Dave at birth. On August 30th, 2022, Dave Karen Rowling released the newest book in her series of Cormoran Strike detective novels, this one called The Ink Black Heart. I kind of thought the title was cool, not gonna lie. Ink Black Heart sounds like something Ebony from My Immortal would draw in her notes during class while daydreaming about fucking Draco Malfoy in a flying car on the way to the Good Charlotte concert.
Draco and I crawled back into the Mercedes-Benz, but Draco didn't go back into Hogwarts.
So let's dive into part 1 of this video, book overview. The Ink Black Heart is the tale of a young woman named Edie Ledwell who has become famous online for creating an animated series on YouTube called The Ink Black Heart, an online weird stoner show all about what takes place in the graveyard after dark.
I'm the dude. So that's what you call me, you know? That or his dudeness or duder or, you know, El Duderino if you're not into the whole brevity thing.
When ghosts and organs can all freely come up out of the graves and interact with each other. After rising to fame in the early 2010s, the Ink Black Heart develops a strong online fandom, including a user who goes by the name Anami.
But I am also a Satanist!
Or Anomi. I'm not quite sure how it's pronounced. However, after last week's video, I did learn that Anomi or Anami is not short for anonymous, which is what I originally thought, so I need a girl start apologizing real quick. I had that wrong. The book even points this out itself. Anami is the lack of usual social or ethical standards in an individual or group, according to what Google says the Oxford English Dictionary says.
Because we're smart.
So anyway, the fandom gets this user who online goes by the name Anomi. Anomi creates a game based on the series that engages a lot of the fans in online play within this game. But after Edie mentions in an interview that she isn't a fan of the game, she doesn't quite get it, she doesn't really think it captures the spirit, pun intended, of what she was going for, Anomi and some of the other fans get mad and start this online trolling campaign against Edie. After years of enduring online harassment and criticism, Edie is eventually found dead in the very cemetery where her story takes place. Now, JK Rowling's recurring detective characters of Cormoran Strike and Robin Ellicott must dive deep into the world of online drama and toxic fandom culture to find out who murdered Edie Ledwell. So I'm not gonna lie, guys, on the surface, this is kind of an interesting premise. And in reading this book, I really wanted to take it from the least biased perspective that I could.
Boo this man!
Of course, nothing in the world exists in a vacuum, and while I like to try to separate art from artist as much as possible, it is important to ponder multiple angles in a comprehensive review. So for part of the review process, I wondered, what if this book weren't written by JK Rowling? Or what if it were still written by her, but she'd never become the queen of the TERFs? Or what if I had just found this book one day with no history or no context of its creation, and only had the content itself to judge it on? Well then, I'd say the premise, solely the premise, not the text, the premise is fairly interesting. A creator getting harassment, seeing fans turn on them, and seeing detectives have to immerse themselves in internet culture to understand a case. That's all stuff that I can find relatable as an online creator myself, who tends to regularly try to bridge that gap between the online world and the real world.
What the hell am I looking at? When does this happen in the movie?
Now. You're looking at now, sir. Everything that happens now is happening now.
And the question of what happens when what goes on online becomes too real, or when the trolling exits the internet and starts to happen face to face. That's one we're grappling with a lot lately as we see various online creators getting doxxed, harassed, or even stalked by disgruntled ex-fans or by online haters. It does happen, and it is time that we see some of that reflected in our fiction and our media as well. In fact, those kind of themes are one of the driving forces behind a book that I released around this time last year, that book being Cancel Sean Boston. You've probably seen the puppet in my chair in the background. He came to the American Girl store with me for my 30th birthday. If you don't know him in the background, that's Sean Boston. He's an internet creator. I thought it would be interesting to write a rom-com about internet drama and what happens when the majority of online communication and relationships form from starting drama online. And I don't want to compare my book too much to this book, mainly because mine's like 20% as long and it's a completely different tone and a completely different genre. But that's just to say that I've written books with similar themes about what happens when the online world becomes all too real as well. And that's an interesting topic to see play out more and more in our work. The problem with this book is not the premise, but the execution. There is so much wrong with the writing of the book itself, the structure of the story, the formatting of the literal book, the text on the page and how it's read, and more. But that's all to say that I'm pretty sad that this book couldn't have been better. In the end, I think JK Rowling is is just at a point in her career where she's too famous. I'm worried that editors might be scared to just tell her no on things, because there is no reason that 75% of the content in this book has to exist to tell the story that I just described. When I was pondering whether to read this book, one of my concerns was, well, I haven't read the others in the series, and people told me, well, it's kind of like Sherlock Holmes, or kind of like Law and Order. It's genre fiction, it's like a crime show. Each installment is a self-contained case, but with recurring characters that work on solving those cases that you see develop over the course of the story. So, imagine my shock and disappointment when so much of this book was spent on the interpersonal drama between every single character at this detective agency and all of their significant others and all of their siblings and all of their exes and all of their families. It became way too much to keep track of. And I think one of the main problems in The Ink Black Heart is, I don't know who this is for.
Who am I? I don't know.
I don't know who the audience of this book is supposed to be, or what we're supposed to expect to get out of it, and whether that's supposed to be a need that's fulfilled. And before I get specific here, I do want to be clear, in literature, there aren't really hard and fast rules. What different readers are going to like is absolutely subjective. Just because overall market trends tend to dictate certain genre conventions does not mean that those conventions are set in stone, or that there's any book police that's going to come out and try to enforce those conventions. However, in this book's case, I think it wanted the length and status of a piece of literary fiction while having the tropes, writing style, and content of a detective crime novel, a piece of genre fiction. Going into this book, if I hadn't seen the media shitstorm that preceded it, I would pick up this book and assume, okay, this Cormoran Strike fella seems a little bit like a Sherlock Holmes type. Maybe this book will be one contained case where I learn a little bit about the detectives, where they have defining characteristics that make them unique and interesting, that we see pop up throughout the story, and then we see how they develop and how they grow and have different character arcs and developments over the course of the series and over the course of each book. But I wouldn't go in expecting to read a deep character study about each of the detectives themselves. This book seemed like it wanted to combine the genre crime fiction style with a level of depth that I, as a reader, really didn't need or want about each detective, and not only that, the very surface level prose itself couldn't sustain that level of depth. This book is written in omniscient third person point of view, which overall I think was a mistake. English teacher savvy time! We're gonna talk about perspectives and points of view in writing today. In high school English class, a lot of us probably learned about first person, second person, and third person points of view. First person being told from the I perspective, second person being told to you, talking directly to the audience, and third person being a description of characters recounted by an unseen narrator. In literature, third person has a few different subcategories, including omniscient third person and limited third person. Omniscient third person is kind of like the Greek chorus in ancient theatrical plays. The narrator, who isn't a character in the story or addressed whatsoever in the story's universe, has access to the thoughts and motivations of all the characters on the page. Many fairy tales, children's stories, myths, and legends may use omniscient third person. In fact, JK Rowling's claim to fame, Harry Potter, used this perspective, which worked very well for creating the feeling of recounting a legend or a myth. But in my experience, and again, this is not a hard and fast rule, but rather my and many other readers' subjective preferences, in genre fiction including romance, horror, thrillers, sci-fi, and detective crime novels like this one, limited third person, I personally think, tends to work better than omniscient third person.
Come here, I'm gonna eat you! I'm bigger than you, I'm higher in the food chain! Get in my belly!
Limited third person is still told through an unseen, non-canonical narrator, but it is limited to the perspective of one character or one character at a time. Sometimes you can do alternating limited third person in which the main character's perspective shifts in every chapter. So an example of where I did this in my own writing, if you look at Cancel Sean Boston, it's told in alternating limited third person. So if you open to the first chapter, it's told from the perspective of this woman named Lindsay. So it's like, everyone suffers for their art, right? Lindsay Drake always tried to believe that, especially on days like these when she was at a mid-sized pop culture convention. So there's a narrator talking about Lindsay. She's not saying I. We're not hearing it from her perspective. But this opening line, everyone suffers for their art, right? That's a line that she's thinking in her head. We can see the thoughts that are going on in her head. We can break down her motivations, what she's feeling, while describing her from the perspective of an outside narrator. But when you go to the second chapter, the book alternates. So then the second chapter is from Rick's perspective, where at the start of chapter 2, it starts by saying, for the first time in years, Rick felt like he could ask someone for their order without them pulling out their phone, pointing to the screen, and laughing at him. So, once again, it's not told from I, it's told about Rick using his name, third person, but we know what Rick is thinking, what he's feeling. He's feeling for the first time that he's not going to be laughed at, and we can see into his emotions. We can't see the emotions or the motivations of anyone else within the scene. And then each chapter alternates that way, which helps keep it organized. Same thing happens in 90s Kids, where, you know, each chapter we have Nicole's perspective, and then it'll start with, like, Nicole looked up from her Game Boy Advance. That's how the book starts off. And then chapter 1 starts with, he's definitely out to get me, Bex told her best friend Hannah. And then we get each of those characters' internal thoughts, but never in the same chapter. It doesn't switch their perspectives in the same chapter. So that way you can delve a little bit into their voice while still remaining detached from it, not confusing the reader by shifting who is I. And that way the reader can still see who is talking and whose head we're in at that time, but it doesn't confuse them by hopping back and forth. And that's to say that I think this type of style would have worked a lot better for this book than just random omniscient third person all over the place. We could be in anyone's head in any moment. You just have to keep up, guys. I think that makes the book a lot harder to follow and also a lot harder to get immersed in and to really connect with each character's motivation.
We started Frenching passively.
So this book, The Ink Black Heart, focuses on 3 main perspectives. Cormoran Strikes, Robin Ellicott, and those are the 2 main detectives, and until she's murdered, Edie's perspective as well. So some restructuring to focus individual chapters within individual perspectives while keeping it all in third person across the board would have gone a long way to keep that storytelling smooth and readable. Instead, we got this random head hopping within chapters, sometimes within scenes, or sometimes even within paragraphs. It can be really hard to tell who we're supposed to identify with in a given moment when the perspectives just shift so suddenly like that. So finally, before we get into all these specific examples on the page, let's talk about the biggest issue with this book, and that's its length.
I'm fine. It's just that you're so big.
It's girth. This book is a fucking chode, you guys. This book did not need to be 500 pages long, let alone like 1100. Who approved this? Who edited this and let the book go on for this long? When I started reading this book, there was a point where I realized I was 50 pages into this book and Edie Ledwell had not even been mentioned yet. Nothing about her had been mentioned. The concept of the Ink Black Heart as a cartoon that exists within this universe had not been mentioned yet. I was 50 pages into this book, and all I had learned was about the interpersonal drama going on between Robin and Cormoran Strike and all their co-workers at the detective agency, and whose sibling had cheated on whose husband, and who was having a baby, and whose family had what drama, and who was having issues with their mother-in-law. That's all I knew. I looked back at the table of contents while I was reading this part of the book, and I realized that I was still in the prologue 50 pages into this book. And that's because, y'all, there are 4 prologues. This book has 4 prologues. Normally a book has 1 prologue. That prologue is usually 1 chapter. It's meant to set us in time and space, give us a little bit of backstory, a little bit of background information, or maybe it's structured a little different, or maybe it's going to set the scene for us before we dive into the meat of the story. This book had 4 prologues, 4 chapters of stuff completely detached from the rest of the narrative of the book. So I'm like, okay, the plot of this book is that a woman named Edie is going to get murdered, and then these detectives are going to have to figure out who killed her, right? That's the plot I was promised. But I'm 4 chapters into this book, and not only has Edie not been murdered yet, We don't even know who she is yet. This woman who's going to be murdered, that's going to set off the inciting incident of the book, that character hasn't even been introduced to us. Her work, that's like the main plot of why she's hated and why she gets murdered, that work hasn't been introduced to us. I'm just over here like, who edited this? Did anyone edit this? So this book had 4 prologues, and I was losing it. And so that was part of the reason I felt that this wasn't really like the self-contained type of detective story that a lot of people were making it out to be, because those 4 prologues were just all continuations of the drama of the detective stories. And I just want to be clear, I think it's great that the detectives are going to get more character development and that they're going to grow as people over the course of the books in this series, and that we're going to see them get into relationships, learn things about themselves, improve as detectives and as people. I think that that makes it more interesting to give them more dynamic characters rather than having them stay static in one place. However, it was too much. It was just too much. There was too much extraneous information that had absolutely nothing to do with the rest of the book. And I'm just like speeding through this book like, I need to find out who the killer is to see if any of this bullshit was foreshadowing. There's no possible way in hell that all of it could be, and almost none of it actually was. So I'm just like, what was the point of this? So all of these issues with the structuring of the book made me concerned that JK Rowling has become too famous to take criticism anymore. Did an editor even work on this? Did a developmental editor touch this manuscript at all? Or was it just proofread once before going off to the printer? Does she have enough pull at this point to write whatever she wants, no matter how painful it is for the reader to trudge through? And speaking of JK Rowling no longer taking criticism, let's get a little bit into her behavior online and the overall internet discourse surrounding this book. From all the discourse surrounding this book on the internet, I think it's important that in a comprehensive review of it, we address all the elephants in the room before we continue on. Part 2, the elephants in the room. First elephant in the room, Dave Karen Rowling's pseudonym for this book, Robert Galbraith. Now, in the previous video that I did about this book, where I just kind of announced that this book was coming and talked about some of the stuff about it online, I mentioned that JK Rowling was going under her pseudonym, Robert Galbraith, for this book. And I mentioned that that was kind of ironic because one of the things she's been getting in a lot of trouble for on the internet recently is being very transphobic and talking about how we need spaces for biological women with vaginas only, and we need spaces that don't allow people with penises into them, and people shouldn't pretend to be a sex or a gender that they're not. She had this like whole thing about that. Meanwhile, she writes a book under the name Robert, which is a traditionally masculine name. And once again, that's not to say that you can't be a woman named Robert. I'm not the name police. If you're a woman and you want your name to be Robert, or you want to name your baby daughter Robert, do whatever you want, okay? I'm not the name police. But my point is, when the majority of people hear the name Robert, they're going to assume a man. So I just thought it was a little hypocritical of her to be so into enforcing gender segregation, but then to go by the name Robert. Like, she's so afraid of people pretending to be women, but she's like pretending to be a man. I just thought that was a little hypocritical of her. But that's not all, because as a lot of people pointed out to me in my comment section on that video, the name Robert Galbraith itself actually has kind of a strange historical connotation, which we're going to address really quick. I had heard this theory before, like I'd seen it discussed on Twitter, but from what I'd heard, JK Rowling was very adamant that the name Robert Galbraith had nothing to do with this historical Robert Galbraith figure, so I didn't want to talk about something without knowing for sure. So I'm not going to be making a claim for sure either way of whether JK Rowling chose this name for these sinister purposes or whether it was just an unfortunate coincidence. I have no way to know for sure, but I will talk about some of the discussions that have come up about it because this has been a topic that's come up so much in my comments. And that's that Robert Galbraith Heath is the name of the father of LGBTQ conversion therapy. So let's talk about that. So this is an article from Newsweek from about 2 years ago now, where it says, wait, hold up, that's exactly 2 years ago. On the day this video is going up, it's going to be September 16th.
Larry, come on, man. It's a little slow. My cakes are getting cold. Hurry it up, buddy.
And this was posted on September 16th. That's hilarious. JK Rowling has denied that her pseudonym Robert Galbraith is linked to the anti-LGBTQ gay conversion therapist named Robert Galbraith Heath. The Harry Potter author just released another book in her Cormoran Strike detective novel series titled Troubled Blood. So this was 2 years ago. If you guys remember, the Cormoran Strike series came under fire 2 years ago because right after JK Rowling was tweeting a bunch of stuff about wanting to segregate spaces based on gender and being afraid of men dressing up as women, kind of all the transphobic dog whistles that we hear. If you haven't seen it already, I highly recommend. There's a video by ContraPoints one of my favorite YouTubers. She did a fantastic video called JK Rowling, where she delves into a lot of the history behind transphobic fear-mongering in fiction. She talks a lot about Silence of the Lambs and, you know, Buffalo Bill and things like that, and in this she talks about the comparison to Troubled Blood, the JK Rowling novel. So at this point 2 years ago, that's when that whole discussion was happening, and that's when a lot of people started bringing up like, this name Robert Galbraith does sound like the name of Robert Galbraith Heath, who was a conversion therapist who tried to convert people away from being gay or bi or trans, trying to turn people straight and cisgender, right? A plotline involving a male serial killer who disguises himself in women's clothing being cited as transphobic in some quarters. The book release follows months of criticism over her views on transgender issues. So this is where it's talking about the history of Robert Galbraith Heath. It says he experimented with a variety of methods to cure gay men using electroshock treatments in an attempt to change a person's sexual orientation. Such procedures are now condemned by the medical community, and I believe within the past year or so, maybe 2 years, conversion therapy has been outlawed in the US, very thankfully. JK Rowling wasn't aware of Robert Galbraith Heath when choosing the pseudonym for her crime novels, a spokesperson told Newsweek. Any assertion that there is a connection is unfounded and untrue. Rowling's representative pointed out that the original explanation for the name, which was originally published on the original Robert Galbraith website, was inspired by one of the writer's heroes, Robert F. Kennedy. I chose Robert because it is one of my favorite men's names, because Robert F. Kennedy is my hero, and because mercifully I hadn't used it for any of the characters in the Potter series or the Casual Vacancy. Okay, wait, this is a little weird though, because I was giving JK the benefit of the doubt and saying, okay, I'm not the name police, you can name yourself Robert if you're a woman, do whatever you want. But she even said right here that Robert is one of her favorite men's names. So she is acknowledging that the name is supposed to sound like a man. So it does sound like she, who is so afraid of men pretending to be women, is admitting to being a woman pretending to be a man. Isn't that... Seems like the call's coming from inside the house. It's like, this feels like projection, dude. Galbraith came about for a slightly odd reason, she continued. When I was a child, I really wanted to be called Ella Galbraith, and I have no idea why. I don't even know how I knew that surname existed, because I can't remember meeting anyone with it. I mean, I can relate to being weirdly obsessed with names when I was a kid. I wanted to be called Dave, so... I mean, we saw how that turned out when I started a Deep Dave series. I've just always had a weird obsession with the name Dave. So basically, she is claiming that, no, it's not named after the conversion therapist. I had no idea that his name was Robert Galbraith Heath. I didn't know this guy existed. This is just an unfortunate coincidence. Whether it's an unfortunate coincidence or whether she did it on purpose, I can't read people's minds, so I can't tell you, but I did figure I would go ahead and address that discussion about it because people have brought it up. So it seems a little bit too coincidental in some cases, because she has been so into talking about how young people are being indoctrinated into being trans, and it's not conversion therapy to try to make young people comfortable with not being trans and things like that. So it almost seems like she's repeating a lot of conversion therapy talking points in a lot of her tweets and things like that. But at the same time, she is claiming that this is a coincidence. I can't read people's minds, so I'm not going to tell you guys either way, but I will say that it's a little bit shady. It does seem a little shady, but I'm not going to just outright accuse her of lying, because that wouldn't be ethical of me as I won't say journalist. I am a journalist, but I don't consider my YouTube videos journalism. This is a book review, so it's inherently opinionated, but I don't know. I just figured we'd talk about it. You can let me know about your thoughts in the comments below. Second elephant in the room. Is Edie Ledwell a self-insert character for JK Rowling? Kind of. So I wouldn't say she's completely a self-insert character, because she's not actually on the page for that much of the book. Like I said, it takes a long time for her to get introduced in the first place. When she does get introduced, it's not super long before she gets murdered at that point. So we don't get to see a lot of the way that she interacts. But I will say that Edie is often portrayed in sort of a Mary Sue type of way. We don't really get a lot of flaws on Edie's end. She's mostly the victim in pretty much every circumstance in this book. And there were a few places where I felt like JK Rowling was just a little too close. It's the same thing with the Robert Galbraith thing. It's like, that could be a coincidence, but it's such a close coincidence. And when you have this many super close coincidences going on, it makes me wonder, like, maybe even subconsciously were you basing this on yourself without, like, trying to? I don't know. But here's some examples. So, as I mentioned, the plot of the book is the fact that Edie is the creator of this beloved, basically YA series. It's not a series of novels, but the book does show that the majority of the fans of it are teenagers, and then some adults who liked it as teenagers, which, I mean, kind of like Harry Potter, right? It's kind of a fantasy style series, although The Ink Black Heart is a much darker series. It involves the spirits and organs coming out of people's bodies, and it has more of a stoner comedy kind of vibe to it from what we see on the page. Although I wish with this much length to the book we'd gotten a little more of actually seeing the stuff play out, like what would be on the screen. But so it's not just like Harry Potter, but it has some similar vibes to it. That along with the main character of The Ink Black Heart being named Hardy, spelled Harty, which is kind of like Harry, which is Harry. She took an R and turned it into a T. Kind of almost the exact same name for the main character. There's Hardy and there's Harry. Could just be another coincidence. And then there's another part in this book where when it's going into all of the internet drama, it's talking about people who get targeted online with hate campaigns. And one example that's mentioned, it's not about Edie herself, but it mentions that there's a woman who gets a huge hate campaign against her online for misgendering a trans woman. And that character in the book is named Maya, which is a little bit on the nose considering, I don't know if you guys have been following this, but I've made a couple other videos on this topic, including my Dave K. Rowling 12 Days of Christmas live stream and the JK Rowling is a TERF video that I made like 2 years ago. In those videos, I talked about how JK Rowling's first big controversy surrounding transphobia online was about Maya Forstater, who was this woman who got fired, or not fired, she didn't get fired, she didn't get her contract renewed. So she was on a contract for a job in the UK, and then she was like insisting on calling trans women he and things like that. She was refusing to call them what they wanted to be called, and because of that, she didn't get her contract renewed because people were being like, hey, you're being disrespectful, you're harassing people, things like that. JK Rowling decided to side with Maya and was like, no, Maya's just stating the reality that we have sex-based differences, which wasn't even really what was happening, but she started the whole hashtag I stand with Maya thing. So Maya was the transphobic person misgendering trans women, and then she names that character in the book who's only mentioned for like 1 page, but that character is named Maya. That seems a little bit on the nose. Again, could these all be coincidences? Maybe? I don't know. But let's talk about the third elephant in the room. Is the book itself transphobic and ableist like some of the headlines out there say? Remember, we read some headlines last week where I talked about one from NPR where it was saying, this book is about a transphobe who gets canceled online. This book is exactly like JK Rowling's life. I will say, the book itself doesn't really talk about transphobia very much. The one thing I just mentioned about the character Maya who misgenders a trans woman is mentioned for like 1 sentence. It's a very brief thing that's just there in the background, but it feels like, I don't know if it's meant to be an Easter egg, or I don't know if it's meant to be a clue that Edie is a self-insert or what, but outside of that, the book doesn't really talk about trans issues that much, other than a couple places that we'll point out. It's very little in the scope of the book as a whole. One of the things that NPR article had mentioned was that one of the things Edie Ledwell, the creator, gets in trouble for is having a hermaphrodite worm in the series. The worm as a character is talked about, but the worm, it doesn't go that much into the worm's gender in the book or into criticism she faces specifically for the worm being intersex, I guess. I don't know, it just doesn't, unless it was like one of the parts where I was like zoning out because this book was so boring, but for the most part the worm wasn't really that huge a part of the book. The hate that Edie receives in the book is less for the worm being transphobic or anything like that, and more, it's less about even the content of the Ink Black Heart series itself. The hate she receives in the book is more for her not supporting the fan-created game, and also it's just like a lot of general misogynistic attacks that she receives. And I think that's because Edie isn't very complex of a character. She doesn't have a lot of flaws.
Thou must, I yelled. If thou dost not, then I shall kill thy beloved Draco.
She's shown to, again, it felt like the Mary Sue type of thing where she really seemed to be the victim in all circumstances and really just didn't do anything wrong. And that made her less compelling of a character to follow, in my personal opinion. I think that was one of the flaws of the writing. But as a whole, no, transphobia was not as big of an issue in the book as a lot of the headlines made it out to be, which again makes me wonder if maybe JK Rowling is acting this way as a marketing technique for this book to get people to talk about it. She just maybe inserted a little bit of transphobia that wasn't really relevant to the plot and just like inserted a couple random ass lines about it so that the headlines would pick up on that and people would hate read this book, or people would read this book because they were sick of JK Rowling getting hate or whatever. I don't know. It feels like drama marketing, and it's kind of shitty of her to do that. But that is to say that there isn't even that much of a discussion of trans issues in the book at all. Regarding ableism, we're going to delve into some specific examples in this book of parts where people have pointed out things that felt ableist, but I have mixed feelings on this because I'm personally not chronically ill. I have dealt with disabilities in my life. When I was a child, I spent most of my childhood in physical therapy. I wasn't able to walk correctly until I was about 7 or 8 years old. So I struggled a lot with various physical disabilities, a lot of them stemming from having scoliosis and things like that. So I'm used to having those things, and I have relatives and people close to me in my life who deal with chronic pain and things like that, but I personally don't have chronic pain. So I don't know exactly what the best representation of everything is. I will say the main character, Cormoran Strike, the detective, he is disabled himself. He lost one of his legs, and so he has like a prosthetic leg. And that's just kind of part of his character. That's part of the background of him. He's never really shown to... I don't know, it feels like it's treated very normally and normalized. I didn't notice anything personally very ableist with that, but then again, if you did as a reader, totally valid. It's possible that I missed something, absolutely. But it did seem more so that the treatment of visible versus invisible illnesses was done very differently, and I will have some specific examples to point out when we go into like the line-by-line breakdown in part 4 of this. But talking about characters who dealt with chronic illnesses or chronic pain or things that you couldn't see versus characters who were, you know, missing a leg or in a wheelchair, it felt like she kind of addressed those things differently. Now, I did speak with one of my friends, does deal with chronic pain and chronic illness, and she actually liked this book. She's not a fan of JK Rowling because she is LGBTQ herself and thinks JK Rowling is transphobic and things like that. But she actually thought that the representation of chronic illness in the book was not that badly done. She said it felt relatable to her. So that's one perspective. You guys may have different perspectives. So again, I'm not going to speak to it fully, but I will say there were some parts where the characterization felt a little weird and a little off. But we will talk about those. And again, I don't want to get into the habit of like trying to nitpick everything because we know that JK Rowling is a dick online, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the content in the book itself is wrong. But there were some places where the characterization did feel a little bit ableist, so we will go into that as well. And along with that discussion of like how people were having different views on whether the book is ableist, people having different views about whether the book is addressing transphobia, things like that, the audience reactions to this book have kind of been all over the place, and that's what I want to talk about next. Part 3. I'm not like other reviewers, discussing the audience reception. So, Goodreads has kind of been a dumpster fire when it comes to this book. In last week's video, I read some of the Amazon reviews, which talked about the book's formatting, which, yeah, the book's formatting is terrible. I was looking at the PDF, and if that's what the ebook looked like, it was really, really hard to get through some of the parts of it where the formatting was all over the place. And I will give it the benefit of the doubt in saying that some of the ways it was formatted could have been to evoke certain feelings, but I really don't care. It was just really hard to read and it was giving me a headache. But when it came to the reviews on Goodreads, so the reviews on Amazon mostly were about the formatting. When it came to the reviews on Goodreads, a lot of the reviews from both sides of the spectrum were not about the content of the book. There were a few that were, and I appreciated those, and I'll shout those out, but there were a lot that weren't, and it really bothered me. There would be a lot of reviews that would be like, 1 star, JK Rowling needs to shut the fuck up because she is transphobic. Which, like, it's true, she is transphobic, and I don't want to support her. So, by the way, I'm not recommending anyone go out and buy this book. I don't think you guys should support her because she is, I personally think, using controversy marketing and trying to get more attention by being an awful person online, right? So I kind of get that. I think she's trying to stay relevant. So that's fair, but it's also not a review of the book. Like, I don't know if that belongs in a review site. And then the 5-star reviews were the same thing. It was people being like, JK Rowling did nothing wrong. I want to support her because everyone's giving her unnecessary hate. And it's like, okay, that's also not about the content of the book. I'm not going to police how people behave on review sites. Write whatever you want. I just personally don't like it and don't find it helpful. And then I found this one review that just kind of blew my fucking mind. And that's this review on Goodreads that says, for a minute, I was worried that the book itself sucks based on the steep drop in ratings. Then I scrolled down a bit and sighed a breath of relief. It's just people mistaking Goodreads for Facebook or Twitter. I'm going to reserve judgment on the actual story until I've read it. When I have something to say about the author, I will do so in an appropriate forum. This person got 457 likes and 27 comments, and all the comments were praising this reviewer, being like, yes, thank you for reserving judgment until you read it. And I'm just like, you gave this book 3 stars. How did you give this book 3 stars if you didn't read it yet? You're doing the same thing. You're on a review site. You're also not reviewing it. You're just talking about how you're better than other reviewers because you're going to reserve judgment, but you didn't reserve judgment. You gave it a 3-star ranking. What is going on? What is going on with Goodreads? This is insane. What I do find interesting was that a lot of people on Goodreads who normally like this series or even normally like JK Rowling were not fans of this book, especially due to the length and the over complexity of a lot of things. So for one example, someone says, I love this series, but this book was just not good. The mystery moves so slow at the beginning. The agency aren't even involved for 100+ pages. Get over 100 pages before the agency even starts investigating the murder. What kind of detective novel is this? And I was about 600 pages in before I really started to feel invested in it. Plus, the detecting was not near as thorough or methodical as it usually is, and there were way too many loose ends that never got wrapped up. For a book this long, the author had plenty of space to do much better than she did. I was left wondering how much input she let her editor have. Did she send anyone an outline? Once again, yeah, she was just kind of all over the place with this. So then we got a bunch of people, we got a bunch of reviews of people who are not reviewing the book itself. Like, before reading this, remember that the author is an outspoken transphobic, which again, yeah, I agree, don't buy the book, but I don't personally think that belongs on a review site. Someone saying, I actually finished the book, unlike 99% of the 1-star reviews on here. Viewing a book you haven't read really just feeds into the actual subject matter of the book without realizing it. All the 1-star reviews are making themselves reflect the hypocrisy Rowling is calling out, and I'm like, okay, you gave it 5 stars and you also didn't review the book. What you just said there is also not a review of the book, so you're doing the same thing. Like, can people, if you love or hate JK Rowling, if you're gonna review the book, can you review the book? I liked this review with 3 stars. For the love of chocolate, will someone please get this woman an editor willing to put their foot down? There is no need for them to be so long. Too much time spent on suspects who end up to be insignificant. Too many chat transcripts that try to skewer every Twitter stereotype out there. Too much will they, won't they waffle between Strike and Robin. It's just too much. The pace of the story and the pleasure of reading could only benefit from the story being drastically tightened up. So with some of those audience reactions in mind, let's move into the biggest section of the video, the part you've all been waiting for, part 4. We're going through the text with a fine-tooth comb to break this book down bit by bit.
What about you guys? We ain't found shit.
So let's look at how the book starts. In the first prologue, because remember there are 4 prologues. So in the first prologue, how does it start? Of all the couples sitting in the Rivoli bar at the Ritz that Thursday evening, the pair that was having the most conspicuously good time was not, in fact, a couple. Cormoran Strike and Robin Ellicott, private detectives, business partners, and self-declared best friends, were celebrating Robin's 30th birthday. And I was like, well, that's relatable, because I just celebrated my 30th birthday the other day with my business partner and best friend, so maybe I can relate to this. However, what I can't relate to is the writing, because what the hell is self-declared best friends? This is just an example of how, even though there's, massive sections that need to be cut and massive plots that need to be cut, even within the words of the individual sentences themselves, there are just words that need to be cut. What are self-declared best friends? Why not just say best friends? Who else is declaring your best friends for you? I'm sorry. Are you turning 30 and your mom is still telling you who you have to be best friends with? What do you mean self-declared best friends? Self-declared is implied. Same with a couple pages later, where Cormoran Strike is talking to Robin about his sister Lucy. He says, I'm not big on having to do things by certain dates. That's more Lucy's department. Lucy was the sister with whom Strike had spent most of his childhood, because they'd shared a mother. Thank you for taking the time and the additional clause to a sentence to explain to me why siblings might grow up in the same house together. You could just tell me she's your sister. You didn't need to explain to me, oh, they grew up in the same house because they shared a mother. What? He and Lucy generally held opposing views on what constituted life's pleasures and priorities. It distressed Lucy that Strike, who is nearly 40, and just continues to go on and on about Strike and Lucy and their similarities and their differences. Lucy's not important to this story, but of course we need some background on Lucy and why they lived in the same house, because they were siblings, because they shared a mother, and how they're different and how they're... Of course we need that. Of course we need that, because it needs to be 100 pages before the main character who's gonna die even gets killed, and 50 plus pages before she's introduced. Of course we need that. I don't like this part at all. It's talking about Cormoran Strike's physical description. He might be broken-nosed, overweight, and one-legged with dense, dark, curly hair that school friends had dubbed pube-like, but that hadn't ever stopped him pulling gorgeous women before. So first of all, I'm happy for you, Cormoran Strike. I'm glad you're getting lots and lots of wet-ass P-word. Good for you. A lot of people, I saw this video by this YouTuber named Sean, I think that was his name, and he did a video about Harry Potter and what a lot of the things were in the Harry Potter universe that we might have missed as kids. And one of the things was talking about how JK Rowling regularly uses people being overweight as a stand-in for them being evil. Either that or they're like overweight in a friendly way or they're overweight in an evil way. But it's always like a character description, which is kind of weird. And I totally get that, like, it's a physical descriptor. So if you want to describe him to show that he's like a bigger dude, by all means, go right ahead. But in this case, it's trying to say he might be these things, but he had no trouble pulling women, which is a weird descriptor. But the part I really have an issue with is the description of curly hair as pube-like. I don't know. I've talked in videos before about how there's so much curly-haired hate in media in general, and it feels like it comes from a very prejudiced place. I don't want to get too extreme and be like, it's Nazi propaganda, but like a little bit it is, you know what I mean? Like, who historically has straight hair in the Western Hemisphere? White Anglo-Saxon Protestants, right? All the makeover episodes of every show always involve the character getting their hair straightened, and now it's describing his hair as pube-like. Like, ew, stop it. That's disgusting. Shortly after that, we get some of our first chat logs on page 54 out of 1170. These are just, I'm going to put up on the screen what some of the chat logs look like, because this is what they look like to read. Now, one of my friends who read this book pointed out to me that she actually kind of enjoyed the bad formatting in the chat logs because it evoked the feeling of what it feels like when you're involved in internet drama, how there's just a million new, like if you're on Discord or something, and a new channel's popping up over here, a new private DM is popping up over here, and you're having to navigate your way through them. And so I'm not going to say it's universally bad because I get how maybe that was intentional or maybe someone might like it, but I'm just talking about my subjective perspective as a reader. I thought this was really hard to get through. It was giving me a headache, and it was like you have to read all the way down one column, which goes on multiple pages, and you have to scroll back up and read all the way down another column, which goes on multiple pages, and it shows them going on at the same time, so you kind of want to dart back and forth between them. I just got confused. I didn't know what was going on. So, as people have mentioned, a lot of the book feels like it's like tweets, or there's like lots of descriptions of tweets and things like that. And I do think that there was a little bit much of that, which I didn't mind because I did like seeing it play out on the page. I liked seeing like actual examples. Just again, I thought it could have been immersed a little better, and I thought that if you had cut out a lot of those side plots in the book, and if she'd really tightened up the prose, that could have been more interesting. But we see some of the tweets that are things like, not proud of it, but I paid, Edie's username for a blowjob back in 2002. And then this is just a section showing that people were like sexually harassing Edie online. So I'm not going to say this is universally bad in the book because it was just more interesting, is that Edie as a creator seems to get hate online from multiple angles, both from right-wing groups and far-left groups. She seems to get hate from both groups, which once again makes me think like, feels like a self-insert for JK Rowling, right? Because she would get a lot of hate from far right-wing groups who would be like, don't let your kids read Harry Potter, it promotes witchcraft.
And what do you burn apart from witches? More witches!
We need to only allow Christian books that allow the existence of God and no witchcraft, that's Satanist, and like things like that. Remember, she'd get a lot of hate for that, and the books would keep getting put on banned books lists and things like that. And then when she was like, Dumbledore is gay, they were like, no gays not allowed. Or JK Rowling would get sexist harassment for being a woman and things like that. So she would get some of that right-wing hate, and then she'd get the far left hate. People were saying, you're being transphobic, you are hurting the LGBTQ community with the rhetoric, the ways you talk about us, things like that. So she did kind of get hate from both sides. I guess I won't say it's hate, I'll say it's criticism. And I think in terms of calling her transphobic, that criticism is warranted because she would do well to listen to some feedback and change her views. But I think at this point she's too deep into it and that's never going to happen, unfortunately. But I did think it was interesting how Edie as a character did get hate from both of those sides. She got some misogynistic hate, she got a little bit of sexual harassment, which I did think portrayed the ways that being a female creator online can be a little bit difficult, right? It can be difficult as a woman on the internet. And that was a fairly accurate depiction, but at the same time, once again, it did make it kind of feel like a self-insert type of thing. And a lot of the harassment was very on the nose, to the point where I think if it had been a little more subtle, it would have felt more immersive. So then we get this whole side plot about how Cormoran Strike starts dating this woman named Madeline, and it's never... I don't know why this plot exists. One thing we do have is that Madeline has like a teenage son. She's a single mother. She has a teenage son, and her son watches the Ink Black Heart cartoon, and that's how Cormoran Strike starts to do some background research on it. So I guess there's that. But like the level of detail it goes into about this woman and her backstory, again, this is just one of the reasons that the book is so incredibly long, and another place where we could have cut stuff. So for example, here we go. The detective was perfectly happy to let his new girlfriend choose the places they went on dates because work had dominated his life for so long. He had very little knowledge of London's best night spots. A couple of his exes, including his sometimes fiancée Charlotte, had been perennially dissatisfied with the kind of places he could afford to take them, but these days he had enough money not to have to worry about bar or restaurant bills. If he had one quibble, it was that Madeline sometimes seemed to forget that a man his size needed more than bar snacks at the end of a long day's work, and he'd taken the precaution of having a Big Mac and large fries before heading to Nightjar, which she promised offered good drink and live music. He was shown to a table for two and sat down to wait. Madeline was usually at least half an hour late. She ran a very successful business with a flagship store on Bond Street, from which she sold and lent jewelry to high-profile clients, including A-list actresses and royals. Strike was becoming used to Madeline arriving in a keyed-up state, talking frenetically about the latest work problem, until, with a few sips of alcohol inside her, she unwound. She was entirely self-made, and he liked her commitment to what she did, her passion for her business, and her pithy observation on the people who underestimated her because of her accent and background. She also happened to be beautiful and eager to have sex with him, and after a long period of enforced celibacy and that dangerous moment with Robin outside the Ritz. Oh yeah, he and Robin like almost kiss earlier in the book, and it goes nowhere because, spoiler, they don't end up together. These saps to his ego were exceptionally welcome. Even though he hadn't told any of his friends he was seeing Madeline, he was trying, as he put it, to give things a chance. "Oh, wait, thanks," he told the waitress who'd come to take his order, and spent the following 20 minutes perusing a drinks menu that was notable both for its length and the extravagant concoctions on offer. At the next table, a couple had just been delivered a pair of cocktails that appeared to have candy floss balanced on the rim of the glass. Strike would have been far happier with a pint of Doom Bar. "Babes, I'm so sorry, I'm late again," came Madeline's breathless voice at last. She was wearing a suede mini dress and boots, and looked as she had every time they'd gone out together. Wonderful. Sliding into the chair beside him, she wound one arm around his neck, pulled him in for a kiss on the mouth, and said, "I had to see lawyers. God, I need a drink." They looked at the pictures and they agree. "It looks like those bitches at El Dorado have ripped off my design. An hour and a half explaining to me exactly how hard it is to prove, as if I don't know that already, but I suppose telling me the same thing 10 different times keeps the clock ticking, and they bill by the hour. Obviously, I haven't looked. You'll have to come back," she snapped at the waitress, who'd reappeared. The girl retreated. Madeline took the cocktail menu from Strike. "What are you having? I'll have something strong." This keeps going and going and going. None of this has anything to do with the plot, and this is just like the extraneous detail that it is for a side plot that is irrelevant from the main plot. I get that in a murder mystery you may want to have multiple plots going on because you don't want to make it too obvious who the killer is, but you also want to have enough foreshadowing and enough development on that. So maybe having a couple different things going on at once. This needed to be tightened up. This has nothing to do with the main plot, and it's not foreshadowing for anything. This is just extraneous, and it's going way too deep into it. And where it talks earlier about his sometimes fiancée Charlotte, later there's all this drama with Charlotte and the fact that his new girlfriend Madeline is creating this new jewelry collection, and Charlotte is going to be one of the models for it, and then Charlotte is like petty about the fact that she and Cormoran Strike used to be engaged, but now they're not, so she starts like making up weird rumors to tell Madeline that he and Robin are together, even though they're not. Like, it's just all this excess drama that doesn't need to exist because it's not at all related to what's going on in the book, and it goes on for fucking ever. Oh yeah, then I even screenshotted the next page because it's all about the drama with Charlotte being a model for the jewelry collection, which again has nothing to do with the book. Oh, I took a screenshot of this one page that says in-game chat between 7 of the 8 moderators of Drek's game. Oh, that's interesting too. Like, Hardy is the main character and Drek is like the villain. Not even like the main villain, just like the bully character in it, which is interesting because like Harry was the main character in Harry Potter, and then Draco was the bully, and then we've got Hardy and Drek who's the bully. I don't know.
Ludi Mary tried to comfort me, but I told her to f*** off, and I ran to my room crying to myself. Dumbledore chased after me, shouting, but he had to stop when I went to my room.
It's not a self-insert, guys. Either that or like maybe she's just not that good at coming up with names. I don't know. So I screenshotted a few of the next couple pages of what the chat logs look like because again, I can't follow this, dudes. Then we get some more stuff about Cormoran's relationship with Madeline that has nothing to do with the plot, where it talks about Madeline and her son Henry lived in a mews house on Eccleston Square. Pimlico? I'm not British, guys. Henry's father lived a few streets away with his wife and their 3 children. He and Madeline had deliberately chosen to move into the same area so their son could come and go easily between the 2 houses. Thank you for telling me how divorce and shared custody works. It's just like when you needed to tell me how siblings worked. Thank you for adding all of those extra words into the storyline, the backstory of a character who has nothing to do with the main plot of the book. Thank you! Henry seemed to be on good terms with both his stepmother and his half-siblings. To Strike, who'd been raised in conditions of insecurity and chaos, it all felt very grown-up and civilized. He walked the short distance from Victoria Station with his collar turned up against the continuing rain, smoking while he still had the chance because Madeline was a non-smoker and preferred her pristine house to remain cigarette-free. The subtle recalibration he always needed to perform in moving from work to a date with Madeline was proving harder than usual this evening. One reason he had no objection to Madeline's persistent lateness was because it allowed him extra time to summon the energy he needed to meet with her always keyed-up demeanor on first contact. Tonight, though, his thoughts remained with Robin and the oddly vivid picture she'd painted for the police of the now-dead animator with her bruised neck and old boots. If he were honest with himself, he'd rather still be at the office, just going on and on and on and on and on. It was Valentine's Day tomorrow. Strike had arranged for a showy spray of orchids to be delivered to Madeline in the morning and was carrying a card for her in his rucksack. These were the things you did for the woman you were sleeping with if you wanted to keep sleeping with her. So from this book, I learned that if I want to get some more P-word, I need to get orchids delivered to beautiful women. Thank you, JK Rowling. You also taught me how siblings work and how shared custody of children works. Thank you for your extra explanations. I don't know what I would have done if this book weren't 1,100 pages long. The next thing I wanted to talk about had some interesting discussions of Twitter culture that I found pretty interesting. So again, if the book had had a little more of this and a little less of the incessant drama among all of the detectives in the detective office. So there's this part where Cormoran Strike is on a laptop and he's watching a live stream run by, so there's this, on the Ink Black Heart, there's some drama going on with the creators of the show where they had a voice actor for the show who ended up spewing some like far right hateful ideology. And he ended up getting fired. Like, Edie fired him from the show for that, and now he runs his own YouTube channel where he's very bitter about it, and he just makes fun of Edie and makes fun of the show now. Which, honestly, is kind of realistic for how things go down on the internet. People get disgruntled when they get let go of something, then they start a hate campaign. Like, I could see that really happening. I really could. So anyway, there's someone who is... So he's like reading a tweet that someone had at him where it says, "How dare you say you're sad, you fucking hypocrite. You've demonized Ledwell and Blay ever since you were rightly sacked. Hate, kill." And then Wally, who is the guy who was the voice actor who was fired for spewing right-wing ideology, then he does the whole "this you," you know, on Twitter people are like "this you," and they pull up an old tweet of yours. And the person that had tweeted that at him, he pulls up an old tweet of theirs where they say, "Honestly, at this point, the bitch can choke. All that BS about doing it for the love, not the money." And then it's about that person tweeting hateful stuff at Edie themselves. So I thought that was an interesting commentary on the hypocrisy of people on Twitter. There's a lot of hypocrisy on Twitter, a lot of people wanting to appear morally superior, and that's not me saying that I would defend this Wally character who was spewing right-wing hate. He deserves criticism for that. But then at the same time, you know, none of us on the internet are free of sin, and I just thought it was an interesting... I'm not saying that Wally was right in his action there, but I just thought it was an interesting discussion about how that kind of does happen on Twitter. That was pretty accurate to how people will pull up other people's old tweets and prove to them that they're being hypocritical. That's a thing we see happening. So I thought that was kind of realistic. That was a realistic moment. And then Wally does this again to someone else. Someone is tweeting at him saying, "You might not have held the knife, but you fanned the flames. And if it turns out some far-right troll did this, you should be prosecuted." This is shortly after Edie's been murdered. And someone tweets at Wally and is like, "Yeah, well, if a right-winger is the one who killed Edie, then you should get in trouble too because you fanned the flame." And that gets into this whole thing of, we have this discussion about what online constitutes inciting violence. At what point does hateful speech lead to violence, and how far back can we go to say that something is violent versus something is just free speech, and then something else being violent is not the result of that? How far do we go to draw those connections? A lot of this isn't really set in stone and isn't really cut and dry. And this is taking place in the UK, so I know the free speech laws aren't the same as they are in the US, but just philosophically, just in principle, when we look at those things, at what point do we say, okay, this type of discourse led to this type of action? And I thought it was an interesting examination of that. I wish the book had gone deeper into these things because these are really complex topics that are especially relevant right now with social media taking over so much of how we discuss things with each other. So this person is basically saying, like, your type of ideology killed Edie. But then Wally pulls up another "this you" moment where that person who was saying, "You're just as guilty for Edie's murder," that person said, "Can someone tell that vile mercenary bitch to take a dirt nap?" So basically this person was saying that they hoped Edie died as well. Now, I will say that a lot of this, once again, Edie is once again always the victim in these scenarios. We don't see Edie having any flaws or Edie accepting that any of the criticism toward her work might have been valid, and we don't see any criticism that actually would have been valid. A lot of the criticism we see of Edie is people just making death wishes toward her. I won't necessarily say death threats, because I think there is a difference between wishing someone dead and going online and actually threatening to kill them. Neither's okay, but I think that there is a difference. But there were people wishing for her death or just giving her straight up sexual harassment or things like that. And I think the book would have been better if we saw more of the legitimate criticism that Edie got for her work, because while I will say that I think JK Rowling gets a lot of unfounded criticism, I think a lot of the criticism she gets where people just say things like, "I hope you die," I don't think people should be saying that to her. I think, if anything, that dilutes the valid criticism, that waters down all the valid criticism that's out there and makes her feel more comfortable in playing the victim. She does get a lot of very valid criticism, though. Again, I highly recommend watching the video by ContraPoints. I know that Jessie Gender has done a lot of videos breaking down JK Rowling's alignment with TERFs or trans-exclusionary radical feminists and how those groups have often gone on to collaborate with people like Ben Shapiro, who are just completely anti-LGBTQ and things like that. A lot of creators out there have done really in-depth breakdowns of perfectly valid criticism. And this book didn't really go into what any of that valid criticism might be. Once again, it just kind of showed Edie as a perpetual victim. But I did think that these parts doing the whole "this you" thing on Twitter were very interesting to read. So this is when it introduces this group called the Havening. And the Havening, wait, is that supposed to be like the Quartering? Hold on, I just got that. You guys know there's that YouTube channel, I don't know if JK Rowling is in tune enough with internet culture to even know that, but there's this YouTube channel called the Quartering, and he's like the most annoying dude on the internet. He just whines nonstop. There's this dude who he's like, does like reviews of TV and video games and things like that, and he just whines like whenever there's a woman in a position of power. He's like, "This is woke propaganda," right? Like, there's that dude, the Quartering, he's a right-winger. There's this group called the Havening. Wait, is that I don't know, that's just a guess. It says on here, the terror group's name is taken from a term used in cryptocurrency where a havening refers to the deliberate halving of the amount of Bitcoin that can be mined. That's kind of funny, actually. So there's this group, the Havening, who has been harassing people online. But in addition to that group, on the same page, they introduce this idea of people trying to pit leftist groups against each other, which I will say does actually happen online. That is completely accurate. And there's an article in it which says, "What we're seeing here are sophisticated campaigns of misinformation and harassment which aim in part to turn progressives against their own. While we've previously seen trolling of liberals originating in spaces like 4chan, the terror group using social media in a more organized and sophisticated way to incite harassment campaigns of intimidation." And then it talks about Maya Satterthwaite? Satterthwaite? Anyway, there's this woman, Maya, and it says, "Maya was revealed to have misgendered a prominent trans woman in private text messages that were leaked online." And that's the only line it has about Maya, but that was another thing where I thought, this seems a little like a self-insert because, again, Maya was the name of the woman who was misgendering trans women that JK Rowling first rose to TERFdom celebrity status for defending. Like, that's a little too deliberate to name her Maya, right? So then later it starts to introduce this character named Kea. I believe it's Kea. Her name is Kea Niven. And this woman is the ex-girlfriend of Josh. So Edie and this man named Josh created the Ink Black Heart together. They were dating for a while they created it. There's this woman named Kea who dated Josh in the past and claims that she had told him all of these cool ideas and that he then stole those ideas and put them into the Ink Black Heart. So she's claiming that Josh and Edie plagiarized her ideas, and that's one of the things she says in there. So this woman Kea says she's violently racist and ableist. If you're only getting shocked by her now, I don't know where the fuck you've been. That again seems like a self-insert move right there, because JK Rowling, a lot of the tweets about her on Twitter are people being like, JK Rowling has been racist and anti-Semitic and transphobic all along. Just read the Harry Potter books, it's all in there. And like, I'll be honest guys, I didn't read most of Harry Potter, so I'm sorry. And then basically the show gets a Netflix deal and Kea Kaya is upset about that. She says, wow, this is great. All my ideas are going to Netflix to make a ton of money for Edie Ledwell. So Kaya is the person who's basically claiming criticism. And then this is one of the parts that a lot of people were saying that the book was ableist for, which was Kaya's Twitter bio, which says she's a spoonie, talks about how she has fibromyalgia and things like that, and that she goes by she and they pronouns. So I think Kaya it's never stated if Kaya is non-binary, but I think she or they coded to be non-binary potentially, and also is chronically ill. And this character, we'll go through this character's characterization throughout the book. This character is shown to be constantly in the wrong and constantly just bitter and angry. And now one of my friends who read this book, who is chronically ill as well, said that they actually didn't have a problem with Kaya's characterization, because they were kind of saying like chronically ill people should be able to be villains as well, because if you only cast them in the roles of heroes, that feels more ableist because it feels like you're infantilizing us. And that's what one of my friends said about that. Now, I don't know. To me, I don't know, guys. I'm not a chronically ill person, so I don't want to comment on that. But the characterization does feel a little off, which I will talk about when we get to some more of those parts. But whether or not you think that is ableist, I will leave up to you. That's a matter of perspective. So then when it's continuing to talk about Kaya and her involvement in all of this, there's a thing where Anami, there's a Twitter message from whoever the supposed Anami person is, who says, I've DM'd you. And then, of course, this is just another example of the overwriting in this. DM'd, as Robin knew, meant that Anami had sent Kaya a direct message. So once again, I'm like, who's this book for? Because so much of it is written in this, like, deeply immersive internet style that you would have to be someone who's regularly involved in fandom spaces and Discord servers and Reddit and 4chan. Like, you'd have to be regularly involved, like, deeply in these fandom spaces and deeply in a lot of these online communities in the first place to even be able to follow the way this is written or know what it's talking about. But then it wants to explain to me what DM'd means. So is this book meant to be consumable by people in their 60s who like detective novels and aren't into internet culture? Or is it meant to be a fully immersive experience for people who are into internet culture? I don't know, and it's not clear when you have pages and pages of these unreadable chat logs, but then you have this moment where it's like, here's what DM'd means. Like, I don't know, who is this for? I just can't figure it out. There's a blog on this, in this book, called The Pen of Justice, and The Pen of Justice is like a social justice warrior blog that's very critical of Edie, and this is another place where this really feels like a JK Rowling self-insert character, because it talks about The Pen of Justice blog says, I've been accused of trying to shame and bully people into conformity with my views. Well, I make no apology for this. If society wants to change for the better, if it is to be inclusive of all races, all genders, all people with disabilities, making bigots scared is no bad place to start. So-called cancel culture is really no more than holding people accountable for the views they are intentionally putting out into the public sphere. Do I want Edie Ledwell dead? Of course not. Does Edie Ledwell make the world a more unsafe place for the marginalized groups with every thoughtless stereotype she puts on screen? Yes, she does. I'm glad she's feeling better now. I want her to do better. I'm like, that sounds like so much of what people say about JK Rowling, which again doesn't necessarily mean it's wrong. It's just that I feel like she just kind of lifted that she keeps claiming this is not a self-insert. I did not write this based on myself. And then to have that in there, that's just so on the nose. That is so much of the exact type of things that people say about her specifically. Now, I think cancel culture is an interesting discussion. The way this is set up makes it feel like JK Rowling is saying, like, yes, cancel culture is a serious thing, because while this blog here in the book is saying that cancel culture isn't real, no one really gets canceled, it's only about doing better, but then Edie as a character legitimately does get murdered, although the murderer is not a left-winger. I will just say that. I don't want to reveal who the murderer is, but it's not someone on the social justice warrior side. We'll just say that. And then you get more tweets talking about, like, this blog is spot on. The Ink Black Heart is ableist AF. It's a cartoon about corpses. Be kind of strange if they were in perfect health. And then we've got Kaya, who's this woman who's like, please do able-splain why disabled people like me should have to tolerate this kind of fucking humor. Hashtag Spoonie. So again, it feels like Kay's only characteristic is being disabled. That's kind of the only thing that we ever get. That's the only thing she ever talks about. So it does feel like a little bit like a stereotype. It does feel like the stereotypes put in there. For all the space in this book and all the stuff going on and on and on about people's relationships and all this over-explaining of things that aren't relevant to the case at all, you'd think some of that space could have been used to give Kaya more of an actual character if she's going to eventually be a murder suspect, instead of just making her only trait that she's disabled. And then once again, Cormoran Strike eventually finds Kaya's Twitter bio, or her Tumblr, I guess he finds her Tumblr page right here, and we just once again get descriptions of her that's like, disabled artist. Life right now is mostly about being sick. CF, fibromyalgia. It just goes on, and like, we basically, again, the only description we get of Kaya is that she's disabled. Later in the book, her physical appearance is introduced, and it's just talked about how beautiful and hot and gorgeous she is. So Kaya has two qualities. She's hot and she's disabled, and that's like it, which is a little wild. And then when it goes through, Strike goes through Kaya's Tumblr, and the things that's on there is like, it's fine not to work or to achieve. Feeling guilty that you aren't able to do either is the result of internalized capitalism, which actually sounds like something a lot of people would say on Tumblr. I'm not saying that it's wrong. I think that hustle culture and productivity culture is way overdone. That's like half of what I talk about on this channel, right? So I'm not saying that that statement is wrong, but I'm saying it sounds fairly accurate to what you'd read on Tumblr. The rest of it is all about disability. It's fine to ask for accommodations. Your assessment of your own body's needs should not depend on how sick other people believe you to be. It's fine to use a mobility device if it makes your life easier. It goes on and on about that, which those things, again, are true. Absolutely. But it just goes to show that, again, Kaya's entire personality and entire character is disabled and also rude. Those are the only things, right? It didn't feel like there was much more, which, once again, if you're going to make someone a key part of the situation surrounding the murder and a key murder suspect, you might want to give them more of an actual character arc rather than just stereotypes. So then later in the book, Robin and Strike are reading Kaya's Tumblr page, and this is what they're saying. So last week I was asked to do something I know will cause me severe mental distress and impact negatively on my physical and mental well-being. It is associated with serious trauma I went through recently, in which I don't believe I've processed fully. In fact, I believe I'm now showing symptoms of PTSD from experience. I know that putting myself through the kind of ordeal I'm being pressured into will have catastrophic effects on my health, and yet I agreed to do what I know will harm me. I've blogged before about how I'm trying to figure out how to exist in a less self-sacrificing way, and it just goes on and on. It says, one of my many problems is that I have ADHD, which comes with a great little extra called rejection sensitivity dysphoria. My RSD is triggered by criticism that neurotypical people would totally take in stride. So when I'm implicitly told that I'm selfless, heartless for not wanting to do something I know will damage me, it just goes on again. All of it is about disability. There's a lot of times that characters with ADHD and autism are mentioned in this book, and it's always in a negative way. Like, that's always mentioned as like a negative characteristic of them, right? And then we see some tweets from misogynistic people on the other side that are just sexually harassing Edie, where Edie's like, same-sex marriage is now legal. I'm so happy. Here's a little rainbow emoji. And people are just like, I can smell your stale P word from here. Suck a bag of dicks. Why did I just say dicks, but then I said P word? I censored myself on the feminized version. I must have internalized misogyny on you, or maybe YouTube ad revenue has internalized misogyny. And then Kaya is, once again, the Pen of Justice blog is saying, the monochrome aesthetic is cool, but when black is bad and white is most desirable, what does that tell us? My take on the problematic palette of Hardy and Paperwhite. So Hardy is the heart, that's the main character, and Paperwhite is the ghost. And then there's this whole, like, analysis of what the colors symbolize. And then Kaya is like, it sickens me to my fucking core that bitch twisted my ideas into this racist BS and things like that. So I think Kaya is supposed to just be the personification of everyone who's ever criticized JK Rowling online. Then later in the book, we see they pull up Kaya's internet search history, and a lot of the things are, like, looking up things about Josh, who is the other person who was stabbed, Edie's boyfriend who created the comic with her, who used to date Kaya as well. So she's like looking up things about him. And then one of the randomest things in the middle of her search history, it just says 10 telltale signs that you aren't entirely cis. So that's the only thing. It was mentioned earlier that Kaya goes by she or they pronouns, but then it's like, we just, like, in terms of Kaya just being a stereotype of, like, everything is just about disability and everything is about being annoying on the internet, right? And then in the middle, it's like, of course, Kaya has to also be maybe trans. What does that have to do? Like, she just threw that in there. That, again, that was one moment that felt like maybe JK Rowling was trying to slide a little transphobia in there, because it's like, if this character is supposed to be so insufferable in the book, why in there did you just slide in that she was also maybe she's gonna end up being trans too? Like, why Dave Karen Rowling did you do that? Anyway, this video has gone on for a very long time at this point, so I think we're gonna need to wrap up.
Hip hip! Hooray! Hip hip! Hooray! Hip hip! Oh boy!
There's just, I mean, that's like halfway through the book. That's like 500 pages into it. We kept going and going. Like, let me see, there's some stuff that happens like 700 pages in that I think we need to call out real quick. So now we're like 700 pages into the book, And this just still going on and on and on with stuff that isn't relevant to the plot. So Cormoran Strike is just like comparing himself to Josh Blay, the guy who was part of creating the cartoon. So it says, you know, Strike's memories of their trip to the hospital were intermingled with thoughts of Robin too, though they took a less sentimental turn. Not for the first time, he had cause to marvel at the fact that the woman who'd come to him as a temporary secretary had proven to be the agency's biggest asset. Retrieving Kaya's letter from the bin, digesting the contents at speed, recognizing that there was one point in there that needed to be clarified with Josh, and doing so without fuss or display might not have been the showiest piece of detective work Robin had performed to date, but the incident stuck with Strike as a perfect example of the kind of initiative he'd come to count on from his partner. Like, cool, 700 pages into the book, you're gonna tell me that Cormoran Strike is happy with his detective partner in that many words? Okay, thanks. If anything were needed to make him value this rare and valuable quality still more highly, it was the continuing irksome presence of Nutley, whose self-congratulation at his own lackluster performance stood in such stark contrast to Robin's unassuming industry. Okay, we get it. You're happy with your detective partner. We're 700 pages into the book, dude. Josh Blay was far from the first young man the ex-SIB officer had met who'd been maimed by the violent act of another human being. In truth, he suspected that had he met Blay whole and healthy, he might well have found him unlikable. Strike knew himself to be prejudiced against certain lifestyles and mindsets because of very early and unhappy exposure to exactly the kind of boundary-free, convention-defying living so enthusiastically embraced at North Grove. His own habits of self-discipline and his preference for cleanliness and order over squalor and chaos had been forged largely in reaction to his mother's lifestyle. Strike had spent too many hours of his youth enduring the tedium of the perennially stoned to find either pleasure or excitement in the haze of drink, drugs, and rock music that had been Lita's natural habitat. The drugged, drunk, and long-haired and beautiful Josh Blay would have been precisely the kind of young man Lita found most attractive, another reason for Strike's unusual antipathy for the type. Okay, so you're gonna go on a long rant, 700 pages into the book, about why one of the key characters of the book, the main character, might not like because he smokes weed, and we're gonna just delve into his whole past. Like, none of this is relevant. Why are you still talking about it? Yet, to his own surprise, Strike had found matter to admire in the young man he'd met in the spinal unit. Blay's self-reproach had been founded upon a dispassionate assessment of his own past behavior that had impressed the detective. Nobody could be blamed for self-pity in a situation like Blay's, but Strike had been impressed by the fact that he'd expressed most distress about the death of his ex-girlfriend and collaborator. The detective, who was still sometimes visited in his dreams by the severed torso of Sergeant Gary Topley, who'd been ripped in two by the blast that took Strike's leg, understood survivor's guilt and the shame that infused the darkest thoughts of the still living, however damaged their own bodies, perhaps most surprisingly because their investigation to date had tended to suggest that Blay had been a mere make-weight in the partnership that had spawned the Ink Black Heart. Strike had found Blay shrewd and insightful to some of his comments to the detectives. Oh my god, I'm just like, my dude! JK Rowling, you are writing too much! Then we are 743 pages into this book. Can we get on with the plot already? In terms of things being too long, this video is getting too long, so let's have a quick conclusion about how I felt about this book. Overall, I'm gonna give this book 1.5 stars. 1 star is the lowest rating you can give a book, and I want to give it close to that for the absolutely miserable experience that I had while reading this. The awful formatting, the endless pages of side plots that go nowhere, and the intense boredom I felt the entire time. But the half star that I'm adding on is for this book's potential.
Stop flaming. If you flame, it means you are prep or opposer.
I really think this book could have been interesting with an editor's help. And if JK Rowling didn't follow the Gabby Hanna school of marketing and act as nasty as possible on social media leading up to her book's release. A book about a woman experiencing misogynistic trolling online, that's relatable. And a deep dive into the ways that online communities and fandoms can become toxic is especially interesting and relevant in today's day and age. The potential was there, but the execution left me with so much disappointment. So if this book had existed in a vacuum, and if I didn't know JK Rowling's beliefs about certain topics discussed before diving into it, or if this book had been written by someone else, I could see parts of it being potentially interesting. But once again, even in that alternate universe, there was still too much baggage surrounding it, and too much literally weighing this book down. What was weighing this book down was the number of pages. It did not even need to be half this long. This book is a chode. So I hope you guys enjoyed this review. I absolutely do not recommend buying the Ink Black Heart or supporting JK Rowling's efforts to get herself in more drama and be super cruel to people on the internet as a way to get attention and as a way to market her mediocre detective novels that are way too long, and that she's doing this as a publicity stunt at this point. That's my personal opinion. JK Rowling, you're rich as fuck, girl. It's time to retire. Okay, Dave Karen Rowling?
Okay, fine. You either die a hero,
or you live to become the character in the self-insert fanfiction that someone wrote about your property that was actually the good one. I'm talking about Ebony.
Why can't I just be ugly or plain? like all the other girls and prets here except for Baludi Mary.
I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I will see you guys again next week for more videos, but in the meantime, please keep on supporting small businesses, and please don't forget to check out some books by some LGBTQ authors out there, particularly LGBTQ independent authors, smaller authors, newer authors, because their books need some love too. You don't need to give love to JK Rowling's stupid ass. Read something by an unknown LGBTQ author. You'll make their day, and you might just find a hidden gem of a book. So I'll see you guys next week. Have a good start to your weekend. Bye, friends!
Get you some nuts.
There was lots of memes.
Makes me wonder if I should take up lesbianism.
Chicago.
You guys asked for it.